A modern-day football field looks like this, but it used to look like this, and this, and this. But the very first one, it looked like this. So how did we get here? Today we're digging into every change that has happened to the football field, because the lines on the field aren't just lines. They're a living monument of the university debates, individual ingenuity, and even deadly collisions that have shaped this 150-year-old game. After today, you'll never look at a football field the same again. If we're truly going to crack the code on the origins of the football field, we need to look at the first football field, not this one. Although this represents the first official field, which we'll come to. We're talking about this, a medieval town. Football's origins started as something now referred to as mob football, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Believed to have occurred as early as the 1100s, entire towns would come together to kick, throw, carry, anything they could do to move the inflated pigskin past the other team's goal line. But the goal line wasn't a standardized line. It could be the freezing river on the outskirts of the town, the water wheel that powered the town's flour production, or even the town square of the next town over. The what didn't matter, only the where. There was no out of bounds, no set goalposts, no standardized terrain, just an area where the ball needed to go. This form of football continued in different forms over the centuries, but as you can imagine, it had its flaws. With potentially hundreds of people all playing over a field that stretched for miles, injuries, royal proclamations banning it, and unsurprisingly, deaths, everything pointed to a sport that was, at best, never going to reach a higher level, or at worst, cease to exist. By the 19th century, different Englishmen had taken the basics of this game and attempted to turn it into something proper gentlemen could play. These attempts to standardize the rules resulted in the formation of association football, or soccer, and rugby football, among other variations of the sport. By 1876, these rules had made it over to America, where the Intercollegiate Football Association had just tried to create a unified football league for the upstart nation. Their set of rules firmly established football as a game where you carry the ball with your hands and kick it through a pair of upright posts, largely based on rugby, with a few unique American twists. In this football, teams played with 15 men aside, so a large field was needed to accommodate the 30-man battle. The field dimensions were set at 140 yards by 70 yards, and the field goals were set at a width of 18 feet 6 inches, and the crossbar at a height of 10 feet. The kickoff spot was on the center yard line, and the field goals were set on the end lines. There were no end zones because you couldn't throw the ball forward. The only way it was getting past the end line was by carrying it across. After you had done so, you were given a chance to try and kick the ball through the field goal. The game was set, and everyone was happy. But once play got underway, the problems started to mount. By its nature, the game was a grinding battle, with the two 15-man teams battering into each other over and over until something broke. The rugby scrum was a chaotic mess and left very little room for strategy and coordination amongst the team. Something needed to change, and the man now known as the father of American football would be the one to make it happen. Walter Chauncey Camp was a Yale man and was painfully aware of football's shortcomings. He made it his mission to transform football into a more strategic, surgical, and explosive game. Over the decades, he oversaw major changes that would be reflected in the geometry of the field. First, he needed to give the teams a better chance at building cohesive strategies as a unit, and the way to do that was to replace the scrum with the snap. This would give a clean pause between plays, giving the offense a moment to regroup and plan their next attack. Teams were also reduced from 15 men to 11, which made this coordination easier. But now the field was way too big, giving offenses a huge advantage with so much acreage to run with. So as a result of these changes, the field shrank from its massive size of 140 yards by 70 yards to a tighter 110 by 53.3 yards in 1881. But team strategy wasn't the only reason. Harvard was looking to move its field, and the track on Jarvis Field fit the new dimensions nicely, so the team made plans to move their field there. But due to unforeseen circumstances, the plans didn't move ahead. However, the changes to the field stayed, and this resulted in a more chaotic, close-quarters game that provided the intensity that the fans were looking for. But simply adding the snap didn't solve football's problem, because the only way a team could lose the ball was by getting it knocked out of their hands or punting it away. And in 1881, Yale and Princeton took full advantage of this loophole. The result was the infamous 1881 block game, where neither side took any risks, and the game ended in the most boring 0-0 tie in football history. As a participant in the game, Camp knew firsthand that things needed to change. His response was to introduce the system of downs. Teams now had 3 tries to advance the ball 5 yards. Failed to do this, and you had to hand the ball over to the other team. But in order to enforce these new rules, the refs needed to know where everyone was. This led to a new field, where white lines were placed every 5 yards up and down the field, making it clear where the players needed to advance and thus keeping possession of the ball. It turned the brutal game of attrition into a game of numbers, with each team carefully keeping tabs on how much they'd move the ball while plotting how to keep control of the game or force it from their opponent's hands. Of course, this soon turned into a deadly double-edged sword that would birth football's iconic nickname. In 1882, there were a number of rules that would seem absolutely foreign to today's players. In today's game, when the quarterback receives the ball from the snapper, they spring into action. They can run in any direction, pass the ball to a receiver, or hand it off to a runner. But in 1882, they were prevented from advancing the ball at all. It had to be handed off to another player. Because of this, and a lack of rules surrounding how many players could be in motion before the snap, most plays resulted in mounds of bodies smashing together at high speeds. Plays like the Harvard Flying Wedge were known as mass momentum plays, where, as the name suggests, players would form masses and use their momentum to pierce the opponent's defensive lines. Unsurprisingly, these kinds of plays resulted in more and more injuries, and unfortunately deaths. With public pressure starting to mount, rule makers returned to the drawing board, with changes coming in 1903. Among the many rule changes was the removal of the requirement for quarterbacks to immediately hand the ball off following the snap, with one major caveat. They could only move up the field once they had moved the ball 5 yards laterally. The idea was that this would force the game to spread out and limit the mass pileups on the line of scrimmage. But with this new requirement, the field needed to be redrawn to track not just the players' forward motion, but their sideways motion as well. At first, this new rule only applied to plays occurring between the 25-yard lines, and so the checkerboard pattern was added to that area. The rule change was well received, so in 1904, that pattern was expanded to the whole field. The resulting checkerboard look was reminiscent of a cooking grill's gridiron, and so football's most famous moniker was born. But despite the attempts to make the game safer, football had just unwittingly entered its deadliest era. With a record number of players dying in the 1905 season, the Rules Committee made the radical decision to allow quarterbacks to throw the ball forward. Up until this point, all passes were rugby laterals that could only be tossed backward. By legalizing the forward pass, this would require teams to fully spread out away from the line of scrimmage, stop players from ramming into each other play after play, and turn the game into a much safer outing. So with such a radical change to the game, you may be surprised to hear that the field didn't change at all. That's because Camp and other traditionalists still saw football primarily as a running game, so the forward pass was slapped with all kinds of restrictions. In regards to the field, one of those restrictions required that a pass must cross the line of scrimmage at least 5 yards laterally from the center, so the lateral lines now served a dual purpose. But in 1910, the Rules Committee changed their tune. Perhaps to limit the predictability of runners and passers, the requirement to move 5 yards laterally by the player receiving the snap was abolished. Instead, that player could run forward as soon as they got the ball. But the pass wasn't exempt from restrictions yet. Instead of the pass needing to cross the line of scrimmage 5 yards laterally from center, passers now had to drop back 5 yards before being able to pass. But this change had a big impact on the field. With no more rules requiring lateral yardage, the checkerboard design no longer served a purpose, and the field reverted back to its pre-1903 design. The gridiron may have only been on the field for 7 years, but the name has stuck. But the gridiron name isn't the only thing from that era that stuck around. The forward pass had become a huge hit, bringing explosive action to a game that was previously known for its slow, brutally grinding nature. The Rules Committee wanted to capitalize on this momentum and further refine the passing game. But the pass was being held back by the layout of the field. Before 1912, if a pass was caught beyond the end line, the receiver didn't immediately score a touchdown. The catch was instead considered a touchback, and the other team would receive the ball on their 20-yard line. The ball still had to be run across the line, happening parallel to the transition of football from an exclusively running game to a hybrid one with passing, was the scoring transition from a kicking game to a touchdown game. If touchdowns and passing were the future of football, catching the ball past the goal line needed to mean something. Thus, to coincide with the point value of touchdowns being increased to 6 points, end zones were added to the field. This meant the field was permanently shortened to a nice, even 100 yards, plus the 20 yards of the end zones. Because the playable area had been shortened by 10 yards, the kickoff spot moved back from the middle of the field to the kicking team's 40-yard line to compensate for the change. The goalposts, however, stayed planted on the goal line. That's partly because of how the extra point worked. Today, when a team scores a touchdown, the ball always resets to the same extra point spot on the field for the point after attempt. But before 1922, football was still following rugby rules. The ball didn't reset to a fixed point. The position of the kick was determined by where the player who scored the touchdown crossed the goal line. If they crossed the line in the center of the field, the offense would simply walk the ball in a perpendicular line as far back into the field as they wanted. The defense would line up on the goal line and attempt to rush the kicker when the holder placed the ball on the ground. So the offense would have to balance their need for time to kick against their kicking range. But what if they crossed the goal line near the sideline? Being pressed against the sideline made for a difficult kicking angle, so teams could opt for a punt out. This is where an offensive player would punt from the edge of their end zone to their team. The defense would rush the receiving players from the end zone when the ball was kicked, while the offense would try to block the rushers while another teammate tried to catch the ball. Their team could catch the ball and try to run into the end zone for an extra point, or they could call for a fair catch and attempt a field goal from the spot of the catch. While this play made for an exciting bit of action to earn an extra point, rule makers saw it as a problem, not because of physical play, but because of the scoreboard. If a touchdown was supposed to be the ultimate prize at 6 points, being able to tie that tally with 2 field goals was too easy. Sure, teams could get a 7th point by earning the extra point, but too many games saw teams not getting the extra boost, partly due to the difficult maneuvers involved with the punt out. So the punt out was eliminated in 1920, and after a few years of tweaking, rule makers eventually settled on making a change to the field. In 1924, the extra point attempt line was born and was placed on the 3-yard line. No matter where or how the touchdown was scored, the ball would be placed here to be snapped for the extra point attempt. But this was the only kicking change that took place that year. Tees used to be in play for kicks, giving the football a more stable platform. But in 1924, new rules did away with the useful tool. Rule makers assumed this would result in a reduction of kickoff distance, so the kickoff line was moved to the 50-yard line. This only lasted for 1 season, as the kickers had no trouble launching the ball past the end zone for a touchback. So in 1925, the kickoff spot returned to the 40-yard lines. But in just a couple years, there were even more kicking problems. While rule makers had adjusted the extra point position just a few years earlier to make kicking extra points easier, field goals had become too easy. Not to mention, teams punting out of their end zone or trying to throw a pass into it were facing a 12th defender, the field goal posts. So in order to make the kick more challenging, bring fairness to the punting game, and prevent players from accidentally smashing into a metal pole, the field goal posts were moved to the back of the end zone. The extra point line was also moved back from the 3-yard line to the 2-yard line to give the defense a better chance at blocking the kick. The game was finding its footing, but sometimes all it takes is one chaotic disaster to show the need for a big change. At the end of the 1932 NFL season, the Chicago Bears and the Portsmouth Spartans were perfectly tied on winning percentage. So for the first time ever, plans were made to have the teams face off in the league's first playoff game. There was just one major problem. A huge blizzard was headed for Chicago, so the decision was made to move the game into the Chicago Stadium, a new indoor arena that hosted hockey games and boxing matches. But while that was a solution for the weather, it introduced an entirely new problem, particularly on the field. Back then, a play ended wherever the ball carrier was declared down. So if someone was pushed out of bounds or tackled near the sideline, the play would start feet from the edge of the field. On a normal field, this wasn't an issue, and entire plays were dedicated to working in these tight spots. But inside the Chicago Stadium, the field had to be squeezed into the dimensions of a hockey rink, with stiff wooden boards circumnavigating the edge of the field. They risked getting their heads smashed against a solid wall. To fix it, the coaches and refs came up with an idea that would alter the layout of the field forever. Hash marks were added 10 yards in from the sidelines, which indicated where a play was to restart if the ball was declared dead outside of them. The system worked so well, the NFL and NCAA opted to make them a permanent part of the field. But this game also marked the beginning of a schism between the pro and college rulebooks, leading to the two games evolving in different directions. We'll mostly stick with the college field layout moving forward. But if you want to learn about every change between the pro and amateur game, we've got you covered. Keep an eye out for that video at the end of this one. But with the addition of the hash marks, the football field still wasn't fully formed. Far from it. And the unprecedented growth that would come flowing into the sport after World War II would lead to a flood of changes to the field. One of those changes came in 1954 and solved a problem no one realized they had until it was fixed. A Wisconsin man named John Lockney convinced his local high school to paint a yard marker for every yard on the field in line with and perpendicular to the hash marks and down each sideline. With lines only every 5 yards and every play not always starting on an even 5, it could be hard for viewers to tell exactly where a team had to reach to gain a first down. When Lockney's Field appeared on a televised college game the next day, the change was praised by commentators and fans alike, with the quote, Lockney lines becoming standard practice for all colleges 2 years later. Recommendations for large yard numbers every 10 yards were added as well, making the action on the field even easier to follow. Over the next several decades, the hash marks would move around a bit, before landing at their current place of 20 yards from the sideline in 1993. But while the interior of the field was taking shape, there was another big element to take into consideration: everyone standing around it. As football grew, so did the media attention, team staff, fans, and player counts. With more people standing on the sidelines, there was a higher chance someone would interfere with the game or get hurt as the game came spilling out into the sidelines. To prevent this from happening, a line limit was added to the perimeter. That today is set 12 feet out from the sidelines, but those sidelines were still getting crowded with all the new personnel. Way back in 1902, there were pretty restrictive rules for how non-player team members could move around the field. 5 team members were allowed to walk on the sidelines, while all other support staff had to remain seated during the game. This was eventually loosened over the years, but as the coaching staff grew, it was decided to create a designated team area in 1957. This team area had adjusted in size and scope throughout the years, where it currently extends between the 20-yard lines. As time marched on, rulemakers have constantly tweaked the game to make things more exciting. When field goals appeared to be too easy, they'd move the point after line. When kickers were sending the kickoff into the back of the end zone, the kickoff point would move. When players would get too bottled up on the sideline, the hash marks would move closer in. So while the field has taken on a standard look in the modern era, there's no telling what it'll look like in the future. To get a better idea of what all of the major differences are between the NFL and college rulebooks, go ahead and click the video on screen. If you love these kinds of historic football breakdowns, subscribe to never miss a fascinating new story. Thanks for watching.